Somewhere in your backyard, there is a hole waiting to be dug that could feed a family for the next 20 years. It costs the equivalent of about $400 in materials, takes a weekend to set up, and requires almost nothing after that. People have been building these systems for roughly 2,500 years, and the reason you have never heard about it has nothing to do with science. In 475 BC, a Chinese fish farmer named Fan Li wrote a manual so dangerous it survived wars, dynasties, and 2,000 years of empire. The instructions were dead simple. Dig the hole, add the fish, walk away. Within a year, that pond would produce more protein per square foot than cattle ranching, more nutrition per acre than any modern farm. And it would keep producing for decades without anyone ever buying a single bag of feed. The story of why this knowledge disappeared involves Monsanto, a $200 billion meat industry, and a manual that was too free to monetize and too effective to let people find. But first, you need to understand what they buried and why. The story starts around 3,500 BC along China's Yellow River. After seasonal floods pulled back, farmers noticed carp trapped in low spots across the floodplain. They were just sitting there, alive, fat, and multiplying. So they dug the holes deeper, packed the edges with clay, and suddenly they had a food source that ran itself. This was not farming yet. This was just paying attention, watching what the land already wanted to do, and getting out of the way. But here is where the story takes a turn nobody expects. During the Tang Dynasty in the 7th century AD, the emperor's family name was Li. Same pronunciation as the word for common carp. And out of either respect or superstition, the emperor banned carp farming across the entire empire. Overnight, the primary protein source for millions of families became illegal. The farmers didn't starve. They didn't protest. They looked at their ponds and asked a different question. What if we stop growing one species and start growing an ecosystem? Mud carp at the bottom feeding on sediment, silver carp in the middle filtering algae, grass carp at the surface eating plants, bighead carp harvesting zooplankton. 4 species, 4 ecological niches, 0 competition, 0 waste. Each fish feeding on what the others left behind. This was the world's first polyculture system, an accidental breakthrough caused by a paranoid emperor. And by the time European travelers documented it in the 1200s, some of these village ponds were already centuries old, still producing thousands of pounds of protein every year. Nobody was adding feed. The ponds fed themselves. I want you to sit with that for a second. A hole in the ground, producing free protein for hundreds of years. But this knowledge never crossed the Atlantic, not because it didn't work, because what arrived instead made too many people too much money. When Europeans colonized North America, they brought cattle, pigs, and chickens, animals that demanded constant feeding, fencing, veterinary care, and labor. The idea of an edible pond that ran itself seemed too simple, almost primitive. It wasn't primitive. It was 3,000 years of refinement. But simple doesn't sell equipment. And that became the problem. By the early 20th century, American agriculture was being redesigned from the ground up, not for efficiency, for dependency. In 1943, the Rockefeller Foundation invested $800,000 into what became the Green Revolution. The stated goal was noble: increase crop yields, end hunger. But every seed they developed required synthetic fertilizer, petroleum-based pesticide, and diesel-powered irrigation to grow. Consider who was funding the research. The same family that built Standard Oil. Every input required petroleum, Every farmer became a customer. Monsanto pivoted from manufacturing Agent Orange to selling Roundup. DuPont moved from explosives to pesticides. Archer Daniels Midland built a commodity trading empire on feed corn. And all three of them needed the same thing from American farmers: keep buying. Every season, come back and buy again. That's not a food system. That's a subscription. In the 1960s, researchers at Auburn University in Alabama actually rediscovered the Chinese methods. Fishery scientists, led by H.S. Swingle, built test ponds as small as 1,000 square feet. They stocked them with channel catfish and bluegill, using polyculture techniques borrowed directly from those ancient systems. The results were embarrassing, at least for the industrial meat lobby. Auburn documented yields of 350 pounds of fish from ponds of just 1,000 square feet. Compare that to a quarter acre of cattle pasture, which produces about 200 pounds of beef per year and requires constant feeding, vet bills, and infrastructure. These tiny ponds were producing nearly double the protein in 1/10 of the space. The original research is still out there, if you know where to look. Auburn Bulletin 381, published in 1965, had the full title Fish Production in Ponds. It was 50 pages of proof that a backyard hole in the ground outperforms industrial cattle. It was published and cited by a handful of permaculture enthusiasts. And then the momentum just stopped. No subsidies, no extension programs, no curriculum. A study that threatened a $200 billion meat industry got exactly as much attention as that industry wanted it to get. And here's where it gets personal. Because the suppression didn't stop in the 1960s. It's happening right now, in your neighborhood. In 2021, the Texas state legislature debated a bill called HB 1686, the Home Food Security Act. The bill was simple. It would prevent homeowners associations from banning residents from growing food on their own property. Read that again. In Texas, in the 21st century, elected officials had to fight for the legal right to grow a tomato in a backyard. The testimony was wild. One woman in Northern Virginia named Nicole Schauder told her homeowners association board she had been growing food to manage her kids' allergies, and the homeowners association threatened to rip out her garden while she slept. In Florida, homeowners associations were banning vegetable gardens outright until the state passed a law overriding them. California had to pass Civil Code Section 4750 specifically to make it illegal for a homeowners association to prevent residents from growing food. States are literally passing laws to protect the right to grow food. I need you to think about how insane that sentence actually is. Meanwhile, the United States Department of Agriculture Farm Bill distributes roughly $20 billion per year in subsidies. Almost all of it goes to commodity crops and industrial livestock operations. Backyard protein production? Not a single line item. Now here's the part that ought to make people angry. Because while America is debating whether tomatoes are allowed in the front yard, Vietnam has been running the full system for decades. They call it the VAC system. VAC stands for Garden, Pond, and Livestock Pen. According to the FAO, in many Vietnamese villages, 50 to 80% of families operate this exact integrated system. The garden feeds the pond feeds the livestock fertilizes the garden. Everything loops, and it is not a hobby. The FAO documented that 30 to 60% of village family income comes from this system. In some cases, all of it. Vietnam figured this out because Ho Chi Minh promoted it in the 1960s. A national leader looked at his country's poorest families and said, Dig a pond, plant a garden, raise some animals, and you'll never go hungry. America's leaders looked at the same families and said, buy more corn. The biology is the same everywhere. The only difference is whether a government wants its people dependent or self-sufficient. And now you know which one America chose. But they couldn't kill the biology. That's the thing about ecosystems. They don't need anyone's permission to work. So let's talk about how the system actually works. Because once you understand the mechanism, you understand why nothing about it can be patented, sold, or controlled. It runs on 4 living components. Each one feeds the next. The ducks come first. They aren't just livestock. They're biological managers. When ducks swim, they stir bottom sediments and release trapped nutrients. When they defecate, and they do it constantly, they are adding nitrogen directly to the water. That nitrogen feeds algae. Algae feeds zooplankton. Zooplankton feeds small fish. Small fish feed larger fish. One duck kickstarts a food chain that costs the farmer nothing. 3 to 5 khaki Campbells will also produce between 280 and 340 eggs per duck per year. Then come the plants. All that nitrogen would choke the pond in a matter of weeks without something to absorb it. Cattails around the shallow edges pull excess nitrogen and phosphorus out of the water. Water lilies shade the surface. Submerged plants like hornwort add oxygen. And duckweed, the secret weapon, doubles its biomass every 48 hours. The ducks eat it as fast as it grows. Aquaponics research has shown plants can remove up to 90% of nitrogen waste produced by fish. Then, the fish. Bluegill and channel catfish are the most common species in functioning systems across the United States. Bluegill require 0 care, reproduce on their own, and reach harvestable size in about 2 years. Channel catfish reach 1 to 2 pounds within 18 months. These fish are not being fed by humans. They are eating the zooplankton and small organisms that the duck and plant cycle already created. And finally, the part nobody can see. Beneficial bacteria living in the pond substrate convert fish waste and duck waste into nitrates that the plants can actually absorb. Without these bacteria, ammonia spikes and the fish die overnight. With them, the whole loop closes. Ducks feed the water. Water grows the plants. Plants clean the water. Fish eat from the water. Bacteria process the waste back into food for the plants. Everything feeds everything else. A typical functioning system measures roughly 10 by 15 feet across, 4 to 5 feet deep at the center. The cost in modern materials runs about $400 to $600 total. Compare that to the average American family, which spends about $6,000 a year on meat alone. Now, here is the part that does not fit the romantic story of ancient wisdom. These systems fail. A lot. And understanding how they fail is the only way to understand why most modern attempts collapse within the first year. The #1 killer is oxygen depletion. Oklahoma State University identified it as the leading cause of fish kills in managed ponds. It happens fast, usually overnight in summer when algae stops producing oxygen and starts consuming it. The cause is almost always overstocking. The traditional Chinese systems worked because the farmers respected the carrying capacity of the water, about 50 fingerlings per 1,000 gallons. Plant coverage between 40 and 60% of the surface, not a single fish more. By the 6th month in a functioning system, fish become visible. By the first year, they are harvestable. By the 2nd year, the fish reproduce on their own. By the 3rd year, the whole thing has woven itself into the land. Fan Li figured this out 2,500 years ago. A fisherman with a clay tablet and an idea that was too simple to patent, too effective to improve, and too free to monetize. In Vietnam, they ran with it. 50 to 80% of village families adopted it. An entire country feeding itself from backyards. In America, laws had to be passed making it legal to grow tomatoes in front yards, while $20 billion a year flowed to the corporations who would prefer everyone stay dependent. But biology does not care about politics. A pond does not care who is president, what the market did today, or whether the neighborhood association approves. It just produces, quietly, reliably, the way it has for thousands of years. Fan Le's manual survived 2 millennia of empire. It can probably survive your neighborhood association. If you want to see what else they buried, subscribe. Next week, we are covering a soil technique that was classified as a military secret. Twice. The knowledge is here. The pond is waiting.